Hi everyone, and welcome to today's CPD on literacy in the social sciences. This was the most requested CPD on the survey that I sent out, and I'd like to thank you all for filling that in. So, to introduce myself, I'm the new Trust Lead Professional for the Social Sciences in the Mercian Trust, and my name is Gage Pearson. My role currently is Head of Department at Shire Oak for the Social Sciences. I was recently in the Teaching and Learning team, and I'm the EPQ Coordinator for the school. As you can see on the screen, there's some main learning objectives for literacy within the Social Sciences CPD. Now, I'm going to be looking at an overview of issues that I've found online, I've found through research and through academic articles, specifically for literacy within the social sciences. And I'm also going to be looking at strategies to tackle these issues and focus on engagement for pupils around literacy, reading, writing, and all of these aspects that come with this. Just to get our brains into gear, here are the aspects of reading that challenge students across the United Kingdom according to research. As a trust, these will affect us to varying degrees, but considering that there is a growing deprivation as a natural consequence of post-COVID worlds, it is more likely that we think that these issues will occur and apply to our students. Now, throughout today, we'll be looking at different strategies that address these issues, and I would like you to pause the video and identify the issues that you seem to face the most. I will be looking at answers to these for the upcoming PLC session to ensure it meets the demands in the social sciences. Now for me, one of the biggest issues was tackling inefficient strategies to locate keywords in sociology and psychology. There was also difficulty in using the information from the text to make deductions around exam questions, so that's been a prior focus for me in the past year and a half. Most of this has been provided by the professional hunch on reading, and I would just like you really quickly to just pause the video for 3 minutes and consider the question, which of these are most likely to present themselves as a barrier in your school, and just take a look, jot a few down, ready for the next time we meet, as we'll be meeting very soon when the dates come out to discuss literacy in the social sciences. Now for most, literacy encompasses both reading and writing. Particularly for the social sciences, there is also critical reading, which we'll come to terms on in a second. When looking at prior research, you can see that Wedgner and Castles found that most children struggle to read words independently, if they have not heard it before, at home, or as a tier 1 part of their vocabulary. Parator supports this, as he also found that students who enter classrooms with a low store of vocabulary knowledge are unlikely to acquire complex knowledge through simple exposure. For schools that are in an area with more pupil premium students, they will often have what Bernstein calls a restricted language code, which is limited vocabulary and makes it a lot harder to tackle in-class tasks, simple instructions, and also exam-based practice. As I said earlier, social science also struggle with critical reading, particularly with the fact that many social science subjects require students to identify the author's contribution and actually evaluate this in a world of research, which is very hard for students who struggle with reading basic sentences, reading complex exam question vocabulary, and applying these to day-to-day practice. Now, I just wanted to provide a strategy early on, a really simple one, just so you can see how the session is going to flow after providing research. So the first one for me is something that I completely forgot about because I looked at it earlier on in my PGCE many years ago, and it is using dual coding. Now, there's 4 aspects of dual coding that people usually talk about, and that is to cut, to chunk, to align, and to restrain. Now, cut is to reduce the content and use dual coding for the most important information, and to focus pictures specifically around the important key terms or instruction. To chunk is to divide the content into groups of related information, such as using a picture to represent more than one thing, which is often harder than it seems. To align is to be neat, organised, and easy to read. And to restrain is specifically not to overdo it, which is what I myself used to do when I first started teaching. Providing hundreds of pictures, fonts and colours to make your slide look fancy can often confuse students who struggle with literacy, particularly SEND students as well, or students that struggle with forms of dyslexia. So you can see 3 tactics on the screen currently. You can see drawings, timelines, graphic organisers within lessons as well. So for me, I always use pictures to show the command verbs. When I was in school, my teacher, Mr. Wood, used to put some weights on the screen at the beginning of the lesson, so I knew that at the end of the lesson we'd have an evaluate question, and it allowed me time to prepare for this. You can also do this within an actual lesson itself, or on the actual slide to direct the students within a certain sequence. See what the training is going to be like. I would like you to pause the video for just a few minutes, and I want you to think about what problems we currently face in regards to literacy in the social sciences. What issues do your students face? For example, for mine, when I sent out an examiner report, they struggled to actually access what it was trying to tell them around literacy and command verb analysis within sociology. So, what issues do you currently face within the social sciences? If you could bring this to our next PLC meet, that would be absolutely amazing to inform the discussions that will take place. Now it's time to get into the data. Now you may have heard this a million times, but it is important that we understand the effect that COVID actually had and is still having on our learners to this day, particularly on their literacy skills. As you can see, both reading and writing were progressively rising from 2016 to 2019. But then in 2022, writing specifically took a huge dip, and external readings by academic professionals, such as that of Alex Quigley, identified that reading did as well. Now we are back in the classroom, you have the opportunity to use time more effectively. For example, complex writing tasks can be broken into small steps and modelled physically. Pupils of all ages get to hear the examples of peers, often writing collaboratively or collectively, and have a live audience to ensure that correcting errors and revising their writing is completed with due care and attention that it needs to be successful. This slide is like making a cake. If you add flour, sugar, butter and eggs, then you will get a cake. But it's how you vary the proportions and the different ingredients to get the specific final piece of cake that you're actually after. As you can see on the screen, this analogy links, as when you see in different aspects of the school as seen on the tree, different teachers are looking at how they can support children in many different ways to make it disciplinary specific, or in the academic world it's known as discipline literacy, where you see different words that have different meanings within that specific subject. This research is based from Alex Quigley. He did an article on literacy, which was called What I Wish I Knew About Literacy, and I will be trying to sum this up in 4 decent steps. Now the first one is that as pupils mature within secondary school, they have to master the specialised disciplinary literacy which we discussed about previously, and practice requires not only consistency, but it needs to be targeted specifically for your subject, as words mean different things throughout. Now if we put this into practice, a lot of teachers, including myself in the past, have asked a student simply to Google a word, or asked a student to look at the dictionary, especially if it's a simple word, which can actually be made more complex within education. Now, reading skills require strategies to guide natural talent. It's all good that a student can read well, but if they don't know what they're looking for, then are they actually reading the correct thing from the correct perspective? And are they even evaluating the text if you look back at that critical reading aspect we suggested? Lastly, writing cannot occur without reading information correctly. It is the most challenging cognitive act that involves socio-economic backgrounds and external factors. Now, all this means is that students who have a lower vocabulary, or students that have a less broad vocabulary, are going to struggle with specific aspects of reading in the first place, and they cannot begin to write well before they can read well. Reflecting upon that concept, I would like you to pause the video for 3 minutes and either have a discussion or think to yourself whether there are any specific tactics you use to guide a student's reading of a text, the way they process the text, and what they actually do with that information in the first place. Teachers is help our students become metacognitive learners. We need them to understand what they're doing with the information, how they process it, and how we can guide them towards understanding their strengths. So essentially, we need to look at the approach to completing the task and why they're doing it in the first place, and try and relate this to the exam and specification rather than simply just reading the text. You provide them so they are ticking a box in the lesson and they can just say they've done the work, miss, or done the work, sir. So as you can see with the research, Shanahan found that students benefit the most from the disciplinary literacy approach that we've discussed, as language becomes increasingly specialised in secondary schools and specifically within sixth form. Now this is where you make literacy subject specific, whether that be the command verbs such as analysis, or the particular theoretical insights and even what to do with the specific texts. You can also see with Mortimer that he identified with long-term research that by removing literacy barriers within this approach, children are able to access an academic world that was previously closed to them, despite the language code that we earlier discussed in relation to Bernstein and the background issues that they face with literacy. The older you go in the research scene, you can see that some teachers had a stereotype that vocabulary and literacy was down to English teachers. But in contemporary society, it's definitely clear that all teachers are literacy teachers and we all need to play our part. So when thinking about this, there is tier 1, 2 and 3 vocabulary, with the 2 main ones we will focus on in school being tier 2 and 3. Day 1 vocabulary occurs naturally at home and at school, and it's everyday words such as pencil, cat, dog, book, whereas Tier 2 vocabulary, on the other hand, is often more academic, such as the command verbs we discussed just like analysis, and it's often made of high-frequency words that we see within education. Now, when thinking about Tier 3 vocabulary words, this is all about low frequency words. For example, in sociology, it's meritocracy, and I know other teachers that have never heard of that word that I've met personally, or cardiovascular in health and social care as it's subject specific. So vocabulary should be introduced in context within lessons, and it's important that we make that clear. So vocabulary being introduced in context is where the learners are being active learners and that they're not just reading at home. Students need to understand and therefore be encouraged to work out meanings themselves based off of vocabulary lists. This allows them to be more independent when reading. It can be done through modelling in lessons, and it can also be done through questioning. This allows for social sciences lessons to be an engaging literacy-based environment. Another way is to also integrate reading into the school. So not a lot of people utilise things like form. Rather than just the lessons, you can provide a reading list for form time, which informs debates when you get back to the classroom. It also allows them to have something to do in study periods if they've already completed their work in advance. To apply this to a student's perspective takes me back to when I spoke to a student in Year 13 a few years ago, and the word they were struggling with was analyse. As you can see, there's 4 definitions of analyse on the board, and don't expect to know where all of these are from. On the right hand side at the top, you can see that analyse means a detailed examination of the elements or structure of something. This is the Google definition that they will find, and the dictionary definition that isn't very well applied to subjects like sociology or social sciences subjects. At the top to the left, you can see examine all parts of the topic and explain the effect of the writer's choice. Again, this is more similar but still not exact, and this is the definition for English. At the bottom right, you can see what does the graph and data show, which is applied to maths, and then sociology at the bottom left, where you have to draw together ideas, real life examples, and make positive links / supporting arguments. Each of these are all to do with the word analyse, the assessment objectives, and the way it's applied in that subject. So one specific command verb can make a student extremely confused and give up and lose engagement early on just because of a simple word. So this is why literacy is really important, and there's obviously a range of different ways that we can tackle this that I'm going to get into soon. Now, on the screen, there's a range of different ways you can tackle this. So what I've done is create a command verb page for my subject that students can stick into their book and apply during questions. Essentially, it's got the definitions within the subject for analyse and evaluate that they can keep and use, which won't affect them. It's not cheating, it's just so they understand what questions are asking them. They also have this whenever I set a reading task, it will use a command verb with what they need to do with the reading. For example, in relation to the example of analysis, it will say, analyse the reading, and they will know in sociology that as defined on the other page, they need to go and then actually look for supporting examples and real life examples. Now, if you carry on looking, you also need to create consistency through repetition. So for each exam question, task, or question in class, have the definition that you've got on that sticking version on the board. I often have like a skeleton structure. It's just a little picture of a skeleton. It's a structure page, and there'll always be a pop-out bubble with the command verb of the question and what it means, so they can look at the board in case they don't understand it. This means that if they understood the content but not the question, then the question and the definition allows them to actually access that content and make the links independently. Big solution is using command verbs as part of starters and plenaries, such as bingo. You can include them in there just as regular keywords, and I'll show you an example of that in a second or later on in the presentation. Lastly, what I do with my higher achieving students is relate command verbs to specific assessment objectives to stretch sixth form students, such as using AO2 as real life examples, AO3 for analysis, and AO4 for evaluate. This bit largely depends on what your actual assessment objectives are, and you need to make links using your professional judgment. This ties into Vygotsky's research. Vygotsky essentially found that learners often rely on each other to complete a task, and therefore they can't complete it on their own, and as you know, the exam is obviously going to be on their own, so it's a big problem. Often you'll find that some students can verbally portray the information, but they can't actually write it down on paper. So all of this by addressing the comprehension of students in literacy and allowing them to understand concepts like command verbs allows them basically to be metacognitive learners and to then apply knowledge on their own 2 feet rather than relying on the person sitting next to them. And then when they go in the exam, they have all of the content that they've just talked about in class, but don't actually know what to do with it. Obviously, it's important that we improve their comprehension. When looking at literacy and exam craft, a key mistake that I used to make is that apart from mocks, I used to only provide them with single questions in class. And I didn't just put them on the board, I used to use modelling, I used to use all of these different pedagogical strategies. But what I realised I wasn't doing was a really simple aspect, that apart from the mocks, they're never actually seeing a full paper, as not a lot of the students would actually look at homework or extra papers that you've given them to take home. So in essence, don't just provide them all the time with a question on the board and a guide to do the question and then do it as a class. Or if you do, provide them an exam paper where they can look, read and examine the exam paper beforehand. So we've had students that have missed a question, they've answered all of the questions instead of actually looking at each one. On the family paper in sociology, for example, you get to pick a topic, and we've had a student not read that part and then go straight onto the topic despite being told verbally multiple times. All of these different aspects can lead to somebody messing up an exam. The biggest key issue is that if you go question by question in class all of the time, students won't actually realise how much reading there is. So they won't consider all the time for items. They won't consider what they actually need to do in the exam at all times. So what I would like you to do here is pause the video for 3 minutes. What do you think the literacy demands of exam papers are within the social sciences for you? And how much reading is actually required in an exam paper before they get to the question you set in class? One of my teachers before, when I was in school, gave me a full paper and got me only to do the reading and time it. And I soon realised that actually you don't get as much time to write as you think you do. And this is often missed when you only focus on giving them questions on a singular slide. Issues that are commonly looked at by research for Ruth Ashby is what are the patterns of knowledge within an exam paper. Teachers often should look at this and see what particular topics they know, which I know most of you will do that anyway, but it's also what tier 3 vocabulary exists within items. Are they using specific words year on year in each paper if you have an item? And the most simple one that people often forget is that if you have an exercise book where they're doing exam questions or line paper, does it match that of the size of the exam paper so they know how much they need to write within a certain time frame? As we have had students that have often missed a question on the exam because they've spent too long writing because they've actually been writing too much in their books and they were unable to tell because they weren't practicing with the appropriate amount required by the exam paper. Before I provide you with some tactics, because I'm going to be giving you a range of pedagogical methods and examples of slides that will be downloadable, I'd just like you to pause the video for 4 minutes. And I would like you, before we continue, to have a discussion or think to yourself whether there are any actual specific tactics you use to guide a student's reading of a text, the way they process the text, and what they do with the information. Are you encouraging metacognitive learners? And what amazing ways do you have that you do this? Because I would love to talk about this when we next meet in our PLC sessions. The first pedagogical strategy is to incorporate it into starters and plenaries, as I said earlier on in the video. Now, as you can see right now, I've left some insert word boxes. Now, that's only because if anyone's going to download this template, it's going to be a lot easier for you to edit. But I've put 3 examples here that are within sociology, and the same's been used for psychology. I've seen it before in economics as well. Now, it's a simple key term bingo. You provide the definitions and they understand the key terms, the specialist vocabulary, or what we like to say, the tier 3 and tier 2 vocabulary that we focus on. Now you can see here that there's meritocracy and there's quantitative, which are both tier 3 vocabulary, but I've also added the word evaluate on the screen as well. This way, if I read out the definition of evaluate and they can't get it, I can assess what learners are going to be able to complete an evaluate question. And not only that, it's encouraging the learners to remember your subject-specific key term for that Tier 2 vocabulary. At the bottom, there is a stretching challenge that you can use, but it's often to create a Tier 3 word for the students so they actually understand and can apply the specialist vocabulary, which in a lot of social science subjects gets them the higher mark band. To tackle the problems we've discussed is verbal tennis. Not all students are going to be visual learners. Some of them are going to be verbal or oral learners. So it's important that students have the confidence and they can essentially tackle issues such as anxiety, which has spiked since COVID across the UK. Now, this one on the screen now is verbal tennis. That's what I like to call it. And it quite simply is where you can start, or the students can start, but you will pick a certain word and then a group of students, 1, 2, you and the student, whatever you like, will bounce back to each other with words that relate to the original word. So at the bottom is the results within a psychology class and sociology class as well. Actually, it was used in both, but there is a specific result for evaluate, where one student said evaluate, the other one replied strength, another one replied weakness, and it continued and so on. But it demonstrated their understanding of what the word required. Therefore, we've tackled the key command verb, and this can be applied in an exam question through verbal learning as well as visual. Now, this pedagogical strategy wasn't actually done in the social sciences or by me, however, I have tried it recently. It is by Science at Shire Academy, and it is using a points-based system to rank vocabulary. Now, students will read a text and highlight the key terms, and then use the key terms to summarise what has been read. Each key term used gets the students a point. So it creates competition and a strive to finish the task. But more importantly, students look and you can rank in terms of the point system the Tier 3 vocabulary compared to other words. This will allow them to better understand the specialist vocabulary required for higher mark bands within social sciences subjects. And you're also targeting students, even by ability, to look for what you need them to examine. That is really easy to make here is a reading bookmark. So for me, as I said, to make it more stretch worthy and to essentially challenge students, I have focused it on assessment objectives and specialist vocabulary and command verbs. So you can see here there's 3 different ones. One social science subject, you can see one for English language that I made with an English teacher, and a maths one that I also made with another teacher from Shire Academy. Now they're all very similar words, they all differ in terms of meaning, and they all have different assessment objectives that they gain marks for. Now obviously this will be a lot more useful for example, Year 13 students that understand what assessment objective has a higher weight in the mark scheme. But more specifically, the whole point of this reading bookmark is that you ask a student to read the task, you set them the task either online or on the board using one of the key words like analyse or evaluate the reading, and they will follow the definition to read in a specific way. But more importantly, rather than getting loads of information or a ridiculously highlighted reading that they bring back and have highlighted everything, they're looking specifically for what you actually require them to know, as you've already looked at the text ahead of reading it and setting it them. Now, this metacognitive tool here is extremely useful as it encourages independent learning. It can be used to frame progress maps by setting different readings with different words and build paragraphs. It's really big for dirt, so if somebody's been set a task to read something, they can swap and their partner can look at the word and make sure that they've stayed on task. But more importantly, it's familiarising themselves with exam practice, and students overall as metacognitive learners are better equipped to learn in such an engaging environment. And the majority of these pedagogical strategies allowed me to tackle the barriers that I faced when delivering social sciences based subjects. Now I noticed that for the social sciences, most subjects were content heavy, and each of these reduced teacher workload, so it was a lot easier to tackle content heavy based curriculums. In addition to that, it encouraged independence, and a lot of students, even though they were meant to have a higher reading age or a reading age that actually matched their age, was a lot lower. So by doing this, it definitely helped improve literacy and comprehension throughout the curriculum. It also allows you in a lot of ways to revisit content as well as revisiting evaluative words, as well command verbs such as evaluate, and address these to improve assessment. When looking at academic reading, as Charles Bonwell says, learning is not a spectator sport. You can't simply just watch and then by the end of it you know everything. You need to be engaged, you need to be interested. A lot of students should obviously be between the ages of 17 to 18 in terms of reading age, as I said previously, but often it's not the case. And ways to tackle these issues, according to the National Literacy Trust, is not only to focus on what to do during the reading, but before and after the reading too. For example, once the reading is complete, is there a scaffolding task that specifically uses the reading that you've applied the reading to after the task? How have you utilised the reading after the students have read it? Have you moved on and said use those to revise? What have you done? What was the point in that reading? In addition to this, we've obviously talked about during the reading, we've looked at things like the reading bookmark, but what do you do before a reading commences? What have you done in advance with the reading to prepare them for it? Good students have highlighted what they think the key parts are to create a discussion at the beginning as a starter. Then they reread it in the class as a group and you use different oral reading techniques to reframe their focus from another perspective in or after the class. Could you have used the reading as flipped learning to inform a debate within class and bring the discussions together? There are many different ways you can tackle reading that isn't just during the time they are reading it. So the big takeaway from this is to think about how you can utilise the actual information in the reading before the lesson's begun or after the class as well. Because for active learning, Brunner found that in a very specific way, scaffolding represents a reduction in the many choices a child might face, and reading actually informs these oral discussions. This allows us to breach things like Bernstein's language codes, where we talked about the fact some students are often stuck with a restricted language code and they can't understand what you're actually saying, not just in person, but in the reading itself or what point you're trying to get across. Encourage active learning. You can see right now that Bromley found through the PISA research that adaptive instruction, otherwise known as adaptive teaching, which has largely replaced differentiation, is one of the approaches most positively correlated with student performance. How can we adapt our lesson on the spot before, after, to actually use literacy, to use reading, to employ it towards writing? What can we do? Strategies that you can see on the left hand side. A lot of times when I've arrived in a reading, I will instantly use higher order questioning, cold calling to inform or check whether students have fully understood it in the class. You can also use it to structure a debate as flipped learning. It can be completely synoptic and linked to different parts of the course. When I've used it to structure debates, I've given each reading group a different reading, given them the key term ranked list so they know what they need to look for and they're all looking at different parts, and then formed a targeted debate where they have different roles and one member of the group will take notes. You can also use it towards skeleton structure, so you can have a structure on how to answer an exam question and then each of the readings link to different parts of the way they form a paragraph based on your specific subject, and then reading focused revision group tasks. On a hot day the other week where it was unbearable in the classroom, even with the windows open, we went outside and each of the students sat at a different area and they had different assessment objectives, different reading and different tier 3 vocabulary to focus on. When we got back to the classroom after half an hour, we then applied these to answer a question and had a debate for the plenary. But my most used tactic currently is what you can see at the bottom right called I do, we do and you do. Now I'll talk a bit about this. This is part of the adaptive teaching where you can stand at the front and you can model your first answer, which is the I do. For example, in criminology or sociology, psychology, economics, whatever subject you may do, you will model a correct answer to a question, you will explain your thought process. After that, you will do one together in the we do box. It will be the length of a full slide. And it sort of gradually releases your responsibility. You're giving less instruction, so they don't need you as much and less direction. And you're creating an example together similar to the first paragraph you made on the left. It then ends with a you do. So now students will do it. It can be in silence, it can be in twos, but it encourages that independence and fully releases the responsibility where students rely on themselves and promotes their independence for future tasks. But students often familiarise themselves with this. So what I like to do is swap them around. When students have got used to this, you could even start with the we do and then do the I do, where you compare their answer to yours and what went wrong, and then end with the independent task and they can see what you've changed with the original answer you came up with as a group. You can put it in any order you want based on how confident you feel your class are in completing the task on their own. And it really utilises the use of different reading you've set and builds together a really well-structured lesson. So guys, this is now coming to an end, today's session, and I'd just like to say thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to exploring other issues like literacy and the social sciences, where we can thrive as a community together and help each other. One thing I'd really like to do is develop a shared area for the social sciences, and I know other PLCs have done this in the past. It's more so we can work with the different colleagues around the trust, we can improve from each other's practice, and we can see what amazing things everyone is getting up to. I hope this addressed some of the issues that everybody had with literacy in the social sciences, and I hope that the different pedagogical strategies that are provided come in use. So I'll email out all resources discussed and used at the end of this session. I'll also attach a questionnaire. Now, this is just going to be to get some feedback, and not only that, to see what you would like to see in future, or if there's anything else you think that I maybe could have done better or provided more for. I'm all ears on that. So thank you very much, and I'm really looking forward to our PLC session, which you should get the date emailed to soon. Thank you very much, guys, and have a good week.